Hey, it's Christy from Lululemon, and I'm here at the office checking out the Shake It Out shorts. These have been my go-tos, and I kind of think of them as a middle ground between a true run short and a more playful, athletic, sporty short. They have all the performance you want for running, so a comfy liner, our lightweight Swift fabric, even a pocket for your keys. But what I really like is the flowy fit and layered hem. It gives it a little bit of volume, a little bit of fun, so they feel as good on a run as they do just at coffee afterwards. You can find the Shake It Out shorts in-store now or online at lululemon.com.
Plan B is a backup birth control option that's there for you when things don't go according to plan. It specifically works after unprotected sex and before pregnancy occurs by temporarily delaying ovulation. Plan B is available nationwide at all major retailers and through delivery apps like DoorDash. No ID, prescription, or age requirement. It's the #1 OBGYN recommended brand of emergency contraception, and it won't impact your future fertility. That's freedom to be. Use as directed.
Hi, I'm Cassidy.
And I'm Amanda.
And we're the hosts of Drinking the Kool-Aid, a comedy podcast dedicated to the mysterious.
Tune in every week while we cover 2 chilling tales about everything from cults
to aliens
to the paranormal,
all with a sense of humor.
So grab a drink
and tune in to Drinking the Kool-Aid wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Tragic Hollywood. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
When people talk about Janis Joplin, they usually start with the drugs, the 27 Club, her unmistakable raspy voice / laugh. But what I think a lot of people should start with is how she changed the landscape of rock and roll and women's place in it. She would sing songs, but not just sing them. She would tear them open and bring a new life to the words that were on the page and the words that were filling people's ears. She really, even 50 years later, has a remarkable voice, a remarkable talent that really was once in a lifetime.
I'm so excited to talk about her because I was really raised on her music. I have loved her since I was a teenager and could understand the music that my parents were teaching me. Even they have seen her live at least 4 times. I was bugging them about that, you know me. And I kept picturing what that would be like because she just was this presence, like you mentioned, the raspy voice. She was jazz, she was blues, she was rock and roll. She was the late 60s and 70s. In the episode of The Final 24 on YouTube about Janis, she's described as troubled and a genius. I don't think that could be more accurate from what I have been lucky enough to learn about her, because obviously she passed in 1970, long before you and I were here. But look at us talking about her. Look at us being well aware of her music, having it incorporated into our lives for decades as well.
Yeah, it is wild to think about me blasting her greatest hits album at 16 years old, driving around town with my BFF from high school. Like, I wasn't even a thought in my parents' mind when Janis Joplin passed away. And so it really is a testament to the lasting power of her music and the emotion behind it, because even people like us who are so far removed from the world that she inhabited can enjoy and feel something when we put her music on.
Of course, like many creative geniuses, Janis was troubled. She did suffer with addiction, with insecurity, with trauma. In an interview with Dick Cavett, she talks about how she's going home for her 10-year reunion and that they weren't very nice to her. She says, they laughed me out of class, out of town, and out of the state, referring to Port Arthur, Texas, where she was pretty much born and raised. And she was bullied. And it's so sad because, and I think we were texting about this, because she was called really mean things. She was called piggy. She was called ugly. She was voted ugly man at this fraternity festival, which ultimately was a catalyst to her completely wanting to leave the state and start anew over in California from Texas. But it's just, she went through so much bullying. Like, she wasn't even ugly.
No, she wasn't unattractive whatsoever, but she didn't play into the traditional ideas of what femininity was.
That's
She
right.
wasn't put together, cleaned up. She had a wildness to her, and you could see that from her hair to what she wore. And I think people didn't know what to do with her. They couldn't put her in a box that they were so used to doing with everyone else. And so they sort of lashed out at her. And that idea of not being able to put Janis in a box, that mentality of the people back then, we sort of got a sense of those lasting ideas in some of the people that were interviewed in the last 24. We talked about this via text last night. Well, at least when I was watching it, I had sent you a screen recording. And it was shocking to hear how some of her ex-bandmates from Big Brother and the holding company, how they would reference her. Or even the documentary itself. There was a part in the documentary, The Last 24, that says she was plagued by acne and had an underdeveloped body. What? Why would that even come into play for the script being written when talking about this woman who did so much for the music industry and for women in rock and roll? It just was like, it felt so out of place and like a slap in the face. And that was like one insult of many insults that were included.
You want to know how many male artists have acne or acne scars
or underdeveloped bodies
or underdeveloped? Like, it's so weird and disheartening how comfortable we as society and the media are about just picking apart women's bodies comparatively to men. Like, not only is it weird that we are comfortable doing that, it's weird when you look at the comparison. And it really makes me sad because I do question what Janis's life experience would have been like had we not done that. Because again, to say this is a person who looks like a person. I mean, she's not, there's certainly nothing inherently that is ugly. Is she striking? You know what? In her own ways, yeah. In her own ways, yeah. And I'm with you that she decided not to conform. And they discussed this in the documentary where she did start wearing black. Like, if she couldn't win in that dress, you know, that photo they kept showing where she's looks like a little 50s teenager. I don't mean to say little and infantilize her, but she was young. So she looks like a 50s girl, a teenager in this pretty dress and very feminine. And it did look out of place, right? You can see it in that picture. You go, that's a girl who's not comfortable in that dress. And that's not fitting her style and who she is. And thank God we have more room for self-expression with style today, because I feel like in the 50s, they really didn't. Like, girls couldn't even wear pants to school. This is something I was discussing with my mom, and it made that make a lot more sense as to why Janis would have been in that dress comparatively to the pants and the feathers in her hair. And you can really see her almost acting out in the way that she dressed. And she'd been doing that, by the way, for years by the point that we saw her doing that on stage. Because again, they mention her kind of leaving behind those dresses of the 50s that they show at least 500 times in the documentary, to her wearing all black and really finding a home with artists when she was in college, also in Texas, but she left Port Arthur for Austin and went to school there for the arts. And then again, still sort of dealt with the bullying, getting voted as ugly man at that awful fraternity festival, but found herself, I think, with more artists when she finally got to start working with Big Brother and the holding company. And what's the most interesting part of that whole thing is Big Brother and the holding company was its own band, right? But then in comes Janis, and she's such a presence and a voice that it couldn't remain Big Brother and the holding company featuring Janis Joplin. No. After Monterey Pop Festival, and I believe that was June of 67, it was, no, this is Janis Joplin. And it was basically featuring Big Brother and the holding company. And egos got in the way of that. They started coming out and it wasn't very good.
No. And unfortunately, I think the egos of everyone in Big Brother and the holding company, there was like a progression of their egos being bruised throughout that change of the name. You know, it started, like you said, as Big Brother and the holding company. And every time her name got bigger and eventually replaced them, they started to realize that she was the talent. Like, obviously they brought something to the table, but she was what people wanted to see. She was just so different and exciting, and artists of the time of where they were at, she really just brought a new wave of music into everyone's ears.
You see this in a clip in that same documentary we're referencing, Final 24 of Janis Joplin. People's mouths in the crowd were agape at one of these scenes. I believe the scene is from the Monterey Pop Festival, because again, this is where Janis really blew up in conjunction with Big Brother ... The camera pans to the audience as Janis starts singing. And again, mouths are agape. There's one woman
I know who you're
specific.
thinking of.
Yes. And it was just
Her
so
mind
cool
was
to see.
blown.
Her mind
was blown.
It kind of reminds me of, well, I don't remember it specifically in terms of time and date, but it kind of reminds me of when I got to discover, or was introduced is probably a better word, to Janis Joplin, and loving it and putting it on my little iPod mini, my silver iPod mini, immediately. And this is when you had to open up iTunes and do all that and download. I did it immediately because I was like, oh, I love. And it was so cool and so different. And I was kind of refreshing and listening a little bit last night. And it was that same feeling. I don't have anything else in my music library that is like her. There may be people who are inspired by her. Of course, all artists are inspired by artists, but I don't, Natalie. I don't have anybody else in my music library that is like going to do the same thing that Janis Joplin is going to do when I turn on her music.
Yeah, there's a rawness to her voice, to her songs. She sounds like she's growling. Even her laugh. There's a clip of her in an interview where she's talking, I think, about the high school reunion. And she goes, like, I don't know what it just is like. If you hear it, you're like, that is Janis Joplin's laugh. Like, it was just, she just had such a distinct sound quality to her voice, speaking or singing or howling, whatever you want to call it. Like, she just had this grittiness to her that no one has seemed to be able to replicate since then. And obviously, like you said, she did open a lot of doors for artists who came after her. Like, I'm thinking Stevie Nicks, Patti Smith, Joan Jett, Melissa Etheridge, like the list goes on. But each of those people I just named all have their own distinct qualities. And Janis she stands alone. I feel like nobody can replace her.
She stands alone is such a perfect way of putting it. I always love when you say something so much more concise than I can say it. And that's a perfect example. She stands alone. Something that kind of made me sad is when you have insecurities like Janis did, people know how to play on them. And Big Brother was no exception. As egos were at play and kind of infighting was happening, unfortunately, because they were really great together musically. One of their last shows, one of the bandmates goes, "Welcome to the Lassie show, everybody." Because Janis sort of did, she had these interesting...
She was panting into the microphone.
Yeah, she sort of panted at the end of one of the songs and it played into the mic and he goes, "Welcome to the Lassie show, everybody," which was essentially calling her a dog. And she freaked out backstage because it was so hurtful, because it was such a trigger. And I don't know that they knew how big of a trigger, but it's definitely one of those triggers that played into her addiction. Not necessarily that specific moment, but that insecurity that constantly got triggered was a catalyst to the growing addiction. I mean, she would be on stage with Southern Comfort on the piano.
Yeah. And I think that trigger we're talking about, that deep hurt that she had, was also just her wanting to be loved and feel connected to people. And when you imbibe, like you mentioned, the Southern Comfort on the piano, it is easier for a lot of people to feel like they belong and not to feel so uncomfortable or awkward. And unfortunately, she really ended up using alcohol and eventually heroin as a crutch, because it's no secret that she passed away at 27 and is a very prominent member of the 27 Club, but that's attributed to her addictions.
She definitely wanted to be where she was in terms of alive here on Earth, because there's a quote where one of her bandmates from Big Brother was telling her, you gotta, slow down. Like, what the heck's going on? And she goes, I'm not going to die. My ancestors came over here across the country in a covered wagon. So she's probably...
Yeah, we're hardy people.
We're hardy people. I think she's referencing like the Oregon Trail or those types of times, going across prairies, which could make sense winding up in Texas.
Hey, I played that game in middle school. I know that you could succumb to many different possible fates. So the fact that anyone survived the Oregon Trail was miraculous. But I see the point that she's making. She's saying that those people live within her and that she is tough just like them. And she was tough, but nobody's tougher than drugs in your system that when they overpower it.
And unfortunately, on the night that she passed, she kind of had a bit of a lonely day. Her fiance told her that, hey, I'm not coming to LA. She's staying at the Landmark Hotel, which is now called, I think, like Highland Gardens. But she gets this information that her kind of newer fiance was not going to be coming to LA. And one of the band members even mentions something about this relationship that really made me sad. He kind of had been doubting it. So I don't know if she kind of was in and out of love with a lot of different guys. It's certainly not really something that's mentioned or kind of categorized in what I researched. But again, he wasn't really like believing in it. And then you have this thing of her being really sad because he's not coming to LA. So she was a bit lonely that day. She wasn't needed for recording until that evening, but she does go and record eventually. And as they finish recording, they head over to a bar where she drank, and she was known not just to drink, but like drink pretty heavily. Like we mentioned, she did suffer from addiction. Alcoholism was definitely within that addiction, and had a night out for drinks before going back to the hotel and using. And you mentioned that, that drugs are tough on pretty much anybody's body, right? And you can't really fight or argue that. The way she mentions in the quote I referenced. Unfortunately, in Janis's case, not only was she using after a bit of time being somewhat clean, I don't know
I think
to
6
what extent.
months.
Yeah,
at least that's that's the time span that's referenced.
I agree. It was about 6 months, and I don't know if that was just speed and heroin or if she had not been drinking either. But it wasn't even just that played into this. But unfortunately, the Candyman, so they're referred to as in this documentary, her dealer drops off heroin and most likely didn't know how pure, I should say.
That's something I learned in our deep dive of Janis about the percentage of purity you want with your heroin. They were saying that typically it's, a single digit percentage pure. And that is, 3% pure. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily safe, but that's the amount that people usually do. But the sample that Janis ended up taking the night she died was upwards of 40% pure. And so we can see with those numbers that there just wasn't any chance that she wouldn't have some sort of devastating reaction to what she had consumed.
She consumes this heroin alone in her hotel room early morning hours after the recording session and after being at Barney's Beanery.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of timeline, it was a bit confusing, but it seems like she went downstairs to get change and purchase cigarettes with said change. And then when she makes it up to her hotel room, the heroin had been pulsing through her body long enough to then now cause her to fall and unfortunately pass away.
Mm-hmm. Right. As you're saying, the heroin started pulsing through her veins. That's what caused the death. But we have to remember she also had alcohol in her system, even though the heroin was the primary cause of her death. And she eventually fell between her bed and the wall, and she was there for 18 hours. When she didn't arrive to the studio the following day, her road manager was notified and told to check on her. So he went to the front desk, got the key, and he's the one who made the discovery. He talks about how he bent down to touch her body and she was cold, and he mentions that there was no life in her. He knew that she was gone. And I could tell that he seems to have been very fond of her, the way he talks about her, because he's one of the few individuals besides maybe her brother, at least in the Last 24 documentary, that talks about her and doesn't insult her looks or her personality. I mean, he does acknowledge that she was complicated. She was this feisty person that could swear at you and drink you out under the table. But she was also this little girl who was so deeply sensitive. And he said he didn't ever want to change any part of her except maybe the addictive part of her. But to hear him talk about such a traumatic moment in his life and the end of Janis's life was sad. It was sad to see, even all these years later, he's still affected by finding her on the ground alone. And I think that is also what's so sad about the fact that she was by herself. This was a person who desperately wanted to connect to other people, who desperately wanted to be loved. And, she was waiting to get together with her fiance. Instead, she just was by herself in the end.
Part of me started wondering, we talk about how pure the heroin was, upwards of 40 to 50% pure comparatively to the more common 3%. It makes me wonder, we learn in the Corey Monteith episode that, mixing alcohol and heroin is extremely dangerous and it can literally stop you from breathing and then your blood doesn't have the proper oxygen in it. I do wonder if even with 3%, she would have survived, with these people that you're like, dang, we would have gotten so much wonderful music. I wish she could have survived this. I wonder, would she have even survived a regular, not as pure bag of heroin? I really don't know, given the fact of being such a heavy drinker and having been drinking at Barney's Beanery that night. And
yeah.
It's just something I got a little hung up on, but
I think she was on a bullet train to self-destruction, whether she intended to be or not.
Definitely, whether she noticed or not. I think with this episode, I always talking about how now I'm going to watch this or I'm definitely going to be listening to her music with more frequency. Especially we'll be listening to Pearl, which is the album that we're left with that she was recording with her death on her own with a newer band that she handpicked. It wasn't Big Brother. It wasn't the Cosmic Blues band she worked with as well. It was that also fell apart. It was a work that she loved. And honestly, it's a really good album.
Well, it became the biggest album of her career. It actually reached #1 on Billboard. And, it includes songs like Me and Bobby McGee and Mercedes Benz, which, that was done in one take a cappella. And I know it was more like satirical, but I love me some Mercedes Benz.
It is one of my favorites.
Buy me a Mercedes Benz.
It's so good. And so is Bobby McGee, the whole album. And I'm also going to be watching the documentary that was created in 2003 about that music festival that was on a train through Canada that she was on with the Grateful Dead and many other like classic rock groups. I really want to watch that. I believe it's called Festival Express, which is the same name as that Canadian classic rock festival.
There was also supposed to be a biopic starring Shailene Woodley come out about Janis Joplin. I don't know when, but I watched an interview that Shailene gave with Jimmy Fallon, and she had said that they've been in production, and this was back in 24, 25. They had been in production for 7 years putting this film together. So I don't know where it is in production, if it's finished, if it's in post, if it's completely scrapped, but I would love to see it because anyone that spends that amount of time perfecting their Janis Joplin growl song voice, I need to see.
As you were speaking, I literally could not practice any patience. I had to look that up because I had not heard that about Shailene Woodley or a Janis Joplin biopic. Can I please give you a little bit of an update of what I am seeing?
Yeah. I probably should have had the update before I mentioned it, but I'm glad one of us does.
Hey, we're a podcast. We're having a normal conversation. You didn't know that this was going to necessarily come up in your mind. The biopic is going to be called Janis Joplin, Get It While You Can. It is definitely going to star Shailene Woodley, and it is in active development and pre-production, but it's been in the works for 7 years.
Yeah, so that's why I'm like, I don't know if it's actually going to come out, because a film that's been in pre-production development for that long, I don't know when we'll see it, but I'm hoping, at one point in the future, we do see it. I do know that she's going to be doing her own singing, so that should be fun. Get to that, guys. I want to watch it.
I know. Come On Production, Temple Hill Entertainment, apparently, is who's producing. So I hope we get to see it. And I hope that you all give us a follow on our social medias at the Murder Diaries pod or podcast. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. We do film and release full video of our DocuFiles segment.
Don't forget, our schedule is Mondays, Tragic Hollywood, Tuesdays, DocuFiles, and Thursdays, a true crime case that needs your attention. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye.